and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing my favorite mystery series, all the way from the Victorian era to the modern age. So in my video where I reviewed the Inheritance games, I had a comment from Keifu asking me what are the best mystery series, what do you like in mystery series, etc. So instead of trying to put that all in a comment, I decided, well, you know what, I need to think about this and just talk about some of my favorite mysteries. So we're going to break this video up into 4 parts. The first part is the Victorian mystery. This is the precursor to like what you commonly think of as mystery tropes. Then we have the golden age of mysteries. This is the 20s, maybe like late teens up through the 50s to 60s, I would say. And then the next one is like the Cozies. The last grouping is just the books that could not fit into any of the other groupings. So I guess they are like darker mysteries or more modern mysteries. And also down in the comments, I would love to know what are your favorite mystery series, because I'm always looking for new mystery series to read. So the first category is the Victorian novel. So a lot of Victorian mysteries were not as modern mysteries. You know, you didn't have the same tropes that you have in modern mysteries. For example, in the first usually like 100 pages, you have somebody die and get murdered, and then you have someone to solve the case, and that's always how the cases go. In Victorian mystery novels, it was not exactly the same, but the first author is often attributed as creating the first mystery novel, and that is Wilkie Collins. His first mystery novel was actually The Moonstone, which I have not read yet, but the novel that introduced me to him was The Woman in White, which is a mystery about a man who finds a mysterious woman on the road, and then it's piecing together where she came from, who is she, and what is going on. So his mysteries are not like murder mysteries, they are more mysterious stories that you have to piece together what is going on. I have not read The Moonstone yet, but I do love this book. I read it in high school and it's a great book. So Wilkie Collins is the first mystery author. The next one, again, he loves his mysteries, but they're not like straight up mystery novels. That is Charles Dickens. Now, a lot of his novels are social commentary on the mid 19th century. However, he often has mysteries as part of his books. For example, this is Bleak House. I just finished reading this a couple months ago, and it has the mystery of where Esther, who is one of the main characters, where she came from, what is her identity. Then even in like Oliver Twist, you have the mystery of who Oliver Twist actually is. So even though you have this social commentary, you have these adventures and story, you do have mysteries that are part of his novels. Like pretty much all his novels include mysteries of some sort. The next mystery author that I really love from the Victorian era is Edgar Allan Poe. Again, his stories are much more gothic tales. However, a lot of his do have mysteries that you are following along to solve. Like The House of Usher is a good example of where you don't know everything that's going on in the House of Usher, and you're kind of piecing it together as you're reading the short story. This is a beautiful copy, by the way. My husband owns this copy, and I was like, whoa, that is a pretty copy, and I've not seen this copy before, but it's a hefty boy. And I haven't read all of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, but most of his have a mystery. Even if you know who the killer or the criminal is, for example, in The Telltale Heart, you know who the bad guy is from the beginning. However, you're kind of piecing together like what's happening. It's much more of a suspense gothic mystery as opposed to like a straight up more modern mystery where you're trying to solve the killer. However, the last one, which is the bridge, I would say, between the Victorian mystery novel to the golden age of mysteries is, of course, Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle started to write the Sherlock Holmes stories in newspapers in the 1890s, so in the Victorian era. However, he continued up until the Edwardian era or later. I think he continued up to, I'm not sure if he continued to the 20s, but I know he continued into the teens. I think Sherlock Holmes needs no introduction. I feel like everyone at least knows his name, even if they haven't read any of his short stories, but this is where you see that gap between the mystery, the more modern mystery with the like Victorian mysterious suspense. you see that bridge here because he does use a lot of like creepy atmosphere. A good example is The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is my personal favorite Sherlock Holmes story. I read it in high school and it's just one of my favorites. And in that one, you have this atmosphere of like mystery element. And do you have a murder in there? I guess you do have a murder, but it's not as predominant. You're trying to find out who this like hound is that's like attacking people. You have that creepy feel that you have in like Edgar Allan Poe or Bleak House, but then you also have more of the more modern mysterious elements of deduction and Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out what's going on. So now we move into the Golden Age mysteries. Now I have 3 authors picked out, but there are so many more that either I've heard of or maybe I've read like one story of them. But because I haven't read enough of their works, I didn't want to include them on this list because these are like my favorite mystery authors. So the first 2 should be no surprise. You've got Agatha Christie. I mean, the Golden Age of mysteries was created for her. I mean, she's renowned for her twists. This one happens to be And Then There Were None, which is one of her standalones and possibly her darkest book. It definitely wasn't the book that got me into Agatha Christie. I think I got into Agatha Christie because of like either Death on the Nile or Murder on the Orient Express. One or the other. I think it was Death on the Nile that got me into Agatha Christie a lot. But this one is definitely the darkest, but one of the best written of all her books. But she is the queen of the Golden Mystery Era. You can't have a list about mysteries without her, right? Next one again, no surprise, Dorothy L. Sayers. This one is Murder Must Advertise. It's one of the Lord Peter Wimsey series. She wrote, I believe, 11 books, novels, and then she has a bunch of short stories about him as well. And hers, no offense to Agatha Christie, are a step up when it comes to characters. So she understands more of human nature and psychology much more than Agatha Christie does. Christie is all about the plot twists, which nothing wrong with that. They're different styles of authors and they're both brilliant authors. So I'm not like saying one is better than the other. Just, for example, Agatha Christie does plot twists a lot better than Dorothy L. Sayers. But Dorothy L. Sayers does characters and people much better than Agatha Christie. Dorothy L. Sayers was writing during the same time. Her first book in the Lord Peter Wimsey series came out in 1923, and the first Agatha Christie book came out in like 1917 or 1916, I don't remember. So they were very much contemporaries of each other. And the last one is, and I don't have an actual one of his books, G.K. Chesterton. He wrote a short stories called The Father Brown Mysteries. These are just a bunch of his essays that he wrote in the Illustrated London News. My mother actually got 2 copies of this, so she gave me one of these. She loves G.K. Chesterton, but he was not only a theologian as well as a philosopher, but he was a unique man. He had humor that is just hilarious. But he also wrote murder mysteries that are really good, and they are, in a sense, they have a lot of powerful themes and messages. His was all about like messages and themes that are deeper, because obviously he was into theology. So you see a lot of that commentary on evil and human weakness and things like that. Really great series. Pick up a Father Brown mystery because they're mostly short stories. I'm pretty sure he only wrote short stories, so they're very quick to read. Now let's get into the cozies. And cozies are a subgenre of mysteries. And they're called cozies because they don't have a lot of like gratuitous violence or things like that. They tend to be lighter, usually set in small towns. Agatha Christie would be the precursor to the cozy mystery. However, I didn't just get into cozy mysteries. I got into a specific subgenre of cozy mysteries. So it's like a subgenre of mystery. And that is historical cozy mysteries. So these are books that are usually written, like all these series are from the 70s to the modern day. And basically they are cozy mysteries, but they are set in a historical setting. These include The Gaslight Mysteries by Victoria Thompson. This is one of my favorite cozy mysteries. These started to come out in the either late 80s or early 90s, but they have been running since then. They are still running, and I still follow them to this day. The Gaslight Mysteries follow this midwife in New York City around the turn of the 19th to 20th century, and she works with this police detective to solve mysteries, murder mysteries. And it's a really great series, not only because it shows the detailed era of the late 19th century New York City, but also because all the characters are just so likable. The next one is the Jane Austen Mysteries by Stephanie Barron. So this book series fictionalizes the life of Jane Austen, and in it, Jane is writing in her diary of mysteries, murder mysteries that she solves. I'm not for sure how many books are in the series as of now. I believe I read the first 13, and I loved them until they killed off one of my favorite characters, and I am still annoyed with that. I mean, I understand they can't exactly get Jane Austen to like get married because in real life she never did, but I also deeply resent that they killed off her main love interest. I'm just saying, I'm still salty about that, and so I kind of stopped reading the series after that. I think I went back and read the few books after that, but I haven't kept up with it because I'm salty about that. But they are just brilliant historical novels because they have all this information about Jane Austen, about that era, because most cozy historical mysteries are set in Victorian era, so almost a century later. But this one is set in the early 1800s when Jane Austen would have been alive. So it takes a look at the era as very different than like the Victorian era, especially when it comes to deduction of a crime, because by the end of the Victorian era, there was a lot set up in investigating crime. You had police detectives and a proper police force that was set up to investigate crimes. You had forensic analysis was just coming up, you know, things like fingerprints. But in the early 1800s, you obviously didn't have that. The next series is the Amelia Peabody series by Elizabeth Peters. Her real name was Barbara Mertz, and she was an Egyptologist who studied Egypt, and she has written a couple nonfiction books about Egypt, and they're absolutely brilliant. But she actually started publishing in the 70s with this series, and the first one is Crocodile and the Sandbank, and it follows this woman who's just come into fortune. It's the late 1800s, 1880s, and she decides to take a trip with a companion to Egypt. And there she meets this rather precocious and horrible man. And the first one reads very much like a 1970s suspense romance. You know, think of Victoria Holt, a little bit of Barbara Cartland in there. It's got those romance elements. But then the book was so popular that Elizabeth Peters continued the series more predominantly as a mystery and not so much as a romance. So the first book is very heavily a romance with the mystery and the murder being more in the background. But after that first book, the series relies much more on mystery, and it's all set around Egypt. So pretty much every book, I'm pretty sure every book takes place in Egypt. Radcliffe and Amelia have a son eventually, and then they adopt this daughter, and there's a lot that is added to their family, and the mystery focuses more on their son in later books. I started to not like that as much when their son got to be an adult, because I definitely liked them, and it was just so funny to see them because it's got a very quirky humor. But I didn't enjoy the series quite as much after he became a predominant character in the mystery and they took more of a backseat, but it's still a great series. I highly recommend it. All right, and the last series is Rise Bowen in general. I love all her books. She wrote the Molly Murphy series, which is very similar to the Gaslight Mysteries, where it's about this Irish woman who comes over in the late 1800s, or maybe the turn of the century. I don't remember exactly the year. And she solves murder mysteries with, again, the help of this police detective. So similar to Gaslight Mysteries, I both love them equally. They are different writing styles. Victorian Thompson is a little bit darker and more serious, and Rise Bowman is all about humor. If you want humorous series, read Molly Murphy, but especially her Royal Spyness, because that series will make you laugh. It's about Georgie, who is impoverished, but she is like 20th in line to the throne of England, and it's set in the maybe it's set in the 1930s. I thought it was the 1920s, but maybe it's the 1930s. And it follows her and her bumbling adventures with all the crazy people she meets. Now we get into the last category, which I don't Oh, I guess I do own one physical copy of these. But these are more one-offs that I didn't quite know where to fit. So the first one I've talked about a bit on my channel before, and that is The Alienist by Caleb Carr. The Angel of Darkness is the second book of the series. Apparently the third one is coming out, and I didn't know that, but I haven't read that one yet. But the first two I absolutely loved, even though I think The Alienist is still the best. So Caleb Carr is a historian working in New York City. So he has a lot of details that like Victoria Thompson and Rise Bowen, who are writing about the same era at the same time period in the same place, they don't have a lot of the details because he is an actual historian. So he gets into the details of how New York was run, all the political elements, all the social elements that you don't see in a lot of cozy mysteries. However, his book is a lot more dark. Go into it knowing that it's not a cozy. It's definitely not a cozy. It's more of a dark procedural story because it follows this alienist, this psychologist. That's what they called psychologists at the time, Laszlo Chrysler, and he, with the help of some friends, people he works with, go out solving these horrific murders of these child prostitutes. So yes, it is a very dark book. The next one is, in general, I got into her books for a while. Mary Higgins Clark. My favorite book by her is You Belong to Me, which is based on the song that is like one of my favorite songs when I was a teenager. I would sing this song all the time. See the pyramids along the Nile. Watch the sunrise from a tropic isle. Just remember, darling, all the while you belong to me. But yeah, it's a great song. But it's a murder mystery that's surrounding that song. But Mary Higgins Clark and her daughter, I think. Mary Higgins Clark is the mother, and then she writes with her daughter sometime. Maybe I got it mixed up. Maybe it's the other one. But they write together a lot, and their mysteries are really good. And they are not connected, so they feature different characters each one. The next two are actually Japanese authors that one, I've only read one book by him, but I loved it so much I want to read more, but a lot of his are not translated into English as far as I know. And the other one, I've read all his books that have been translated into English, that I know of. I've talked about Keigo Higashino with his Detective Galileo series. He also wrote like Malice. That's on a different series. So there's two different series that he wrote, but not many of them have been translated into English, but they are kind of standalones. So you can read them out of order, and I have read them out of order because like the first few haven't been translated into English, but like some of them have. So I've just read them as they come out or as they are being translated. His books are deeply psychological, usually very dark. Usually you know who the murderer is relatively early on, and it's all about solving of like how did they do it and why did they do it. And the other one is Hideo Yokoyama, and he wrote 6-4, which is a brilliant novel. I'm pretty sure that is like 500 plus pages. That is a long book. As far as I know, that is the only one, at least at my library, that they have translated to English. But it's all about solving this old case, and that one gets much more into police procedural as well as understanding police corruption, social, economic, political stuff going on in Japan. It is a brilliant book. I highly recommend it. I want to read more of his books because he's such an amazing both mystery writer. His are much more dabbling in thriller. Oh, and the last one I could have put into the historical cozy section, but I don't think it's that cozy. The Beekeeper's Apprentice by Laurie R. King follows a fictional young woman, Mary Russell, who befriends and ends up marrying Sherlock Holmes, an older retired Sherlock Holmes. He's now a beekeeper who lives in the country in England. And it is all about their adventures, their travels. The first 6 or so books are brilliant. They're absolutely amazing. After that, I think the mystery definitely goes downhill a little bit. These are not as much full-out mysteries. They do have mysteries in them, but they tend to be much more suspense novels. And that's my list. Are there any mysteries that you would put on this list that you didn't see there? Have you read any of these mystery authors? I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, like, subscribe. I post every Saturday and Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!